A hag is an evocative character in fantasy literature and role-playing games, but it can be easy to fall into the trap of creating a tropey and cartoonish witch who cackles madly while stirring ingredients into her cauldron. Hags shouldn't be a throwaway random encounter. What fear do hags represent that has made them echo throughout human mythology? My name is Byrne, and this is how to make hags formidable in your D&D campaign. There are literally endless legends, myths, fairy tales, books, movies, and nursery rhymes that feature a character resembling a hag. It's why defining specifically what a hag is becomes remarkably difficult unless you're using an incredibly narrow or an incredibly broad definition. The three witches that predict men's fates in Macbeth are described as very hag-like. They're withered, wild, and look not like the inhabitants of the earth. There are obvious similarities between them and the Fates from Greek mythology, yet the Fates aren't always depicted as old women, and weaving fate is not always associated with a hag. The three witches' behavior is quite unlike Black Annis, who is a hag from English folklore who eats the flesh of children and was clearly the inspiration for the Annis hag in 5e. Black Annis is similar to the Icelandic myth Grilla, who also snatches or barters for ill-behaved children to feast upon. Grilla uses a cauldron to cook her morbid meals, much like the witches in Macbeth use a cauldron to conjure prophecies, but not every hag uses a cauldron. Byrne hags from 5e were apparently inspired by a Celtic divinity who was associated with winter, cold winds, and wilderness. Hags seem to have their mythological origins quite often stemming from divinity. Arguably, the most famous witch of the woods, Baba Yaga, may have also once been considered a god of nature, which can be cruel in turns. She isn't always the antagonist of the stories where she appears. Sometimes she provides aid or knowledge that helps the hero of the tale. She's terrifying, sure, and seems to represent darkness, danger, and death, but she isn't necessarily always pure evil. Hags frequently seem to embody wisdom and knowledge that comes with age, as befits their elderly, withered appearance. In the original story for The Little Mermaid, the nameless mermaid visits a sea witch who lives in a house built from the bones of shipwrecked humans. The witch is likewise hideously disfigured with long clawed fingers and is an obvious inspiration for the sea hags of 5th edition. The sea witch is definitely a detestable character in the story, but she only ever provides aid to the Little Mermaid that comes with forewarned consequences. This motif of trade and dark bargains that the Sea Witch, Grilla, and Baba Yaga all share is another commonality to hags, fey creatures, and also demons, interestingly. During the spread of the Black Death in Scandinavia, an old hag-like woman called the Pester would travel from town to town spreading disease. She did this by sweeping with her broom. Occasionally, she would use her rake instead, in which case some folk would survive by slipping through the teeth of her rake. She was terrible, but she was a neutral force of nature. And being a force of nature is a defining trait for hags. The three witches represent inescapable fate. The Byrne hag represents the cruelty of winter. The Pester represents disease. The sea hag represents the perils of the ocean, and Baba Yaga represents the deep, dark woods. Hags represent a fear of the uncontrollable cruelty of nature. In the village, we are safe, because it is a world controlled by civilization. But out there in the wilderness lurks the uncontrollable and frightful power of a hag. The region surrounding a hag's lair should be an extension of the hag itself. In 5e D&D, hags are fey creatures, personifications of the primal world, which ties into their association with nature at its most dangerous and uncontrollable. In essence, a hag and their domain are the same thing. Perhaps a hag's appearance and powers change over the years as their domain does. They grow physically and visually older through the centuries with their forest. Or they grow more haggard and monstrous as mortals poison the forest with pollution and cut down their trees. It should not be possible to enter a hag's domain without their knowledge, and perhaps it's not possible to navigate their domain without the hag allowing it. In this mystical video about Formidable Fae in D&D, I went into detail about how the Feywild is a subtle place that is stitched into the natural world rather than being a different dimension entirely separate from it. You could search the entire forest for a year and never find the hag's hut that exists at the center of it. There are certain areas that are simply inaccessible without either the hag's permission or your party solving a way to transgress through their magical protections. Hags are not physically powerful, but it is in the process of reaching the hag that the party should feel how formidable they can be. Therefore, it's important to have regional effects and lair actions that reinforce the hag's connection to their domain and reinforces them as a representation of their domain. Regional effects don't always have to be dangerous. They could be navigational puzzles or a grim warning like displayed trinkets or corpses, but they should always reinforce what the type of hag you're using thematically represents, and you should try to create about 2 to 3 of them. Regional effects can also be great clues if your party is on a monster hunt but don't yet realize their adversary is a hag. Volo's Guide to Monsters had an excellent chapter on hags that described regional effects and lair actions that were tailored to each of the 5e hags. It was something that was sadly lost when Monsters of the Multiverse replaced Volos, but if you can get your hands on a copy of Volos, it's well worth it for running hags. The Green Hag is your classic forest bog hag. The mimicry and illusory parts of their stat block are very cool and obviously meant to represent the deceptive nature of hags. They've got a bag of hit points and their claw attack can deal real damage, but they're going to need a lot of support from minions, lair actions, and regional effects to feel truly formidable. Ideally, they should probably be turning invisible and avoiding a fight entirely, but the party can still drive them away by destroying their lair. I had green hags also turn into green dragons, Maleficent or Flemeth style, which never fails to shock the party from what they thought was going to be a relatively easy fight. Sea hags are also pretty weak and honestly make for more memorable social encounters than combat encounters. Their horrific appearance is their defining trait, so when the party have to go and bargain with one, playing up how disgusting and terrifying they are to look at is how to make them stick in the minds of your players. They also don't need to be ocean hags, they can be swamp or lagoon hags. My inspiration for a sea hag is usually something like the Grudge slowly rising up out of the bathwater. Byrne hags. They are much more mechanically dangerous, especially with spells like Cone of Cold, allowing them to deal high damage to the entire party. Fly them around on their grey staff and have them appear in blizzards where they can become invisible in the storm. Their regional effects should include bodies horrifically preserved in ice. Reading real-world tragedies of Mount Everest or the Dyatlov Pass incident, Google it, it can be harrowing inspiration. The Annis hag is also a bruiser, and also the hag I kinda know what to do with the least. I like her stat block and the crushing hug ability, but they're more of a blunt force instrument to challenge your party with. I think I would make the Annis hag the focus of a monster hunt where folk are going missing in the mountains and leave clues that the party are hunting some sort of witch. I love red hags from Grim Hollow's Monster Grimoire. They have been cursed by other hags to become mortal and unable to change their horrible appearance. They instead perform rituals to steal other commoners' bodies to hide their appearance and to sustain their life. Over the course of 3 years and 3 days, they slowly change back into their original form. And I love this image of encountering a red hag midway through this transmutation. They're also excellent bargainers and might make for a more surprising alternative to a green hag in your campaign. Dusk hags seem fine, but I think I'd rather use an night hag for a dream and fate-themed hag. A dusk hag has to be so close to its target to affect it. Its victims will likely be woken from sleep before the dusk hag gets a second turn to attack it, and its reaction against waking sleepers isn't really strong enough to be worth casting sleep once each turn instead of attacking. Night hags, on the other hand, make resting in their domain a literal nightmare for the party. They can harrow them from the ethereal plane and make for a great mystery when a whole village reports bad dreams spreading like a plague. Though they may still need some minion support in a straight up throwdown. I prefer to assume every hag is unique, or if there are types of hags, their numbers are very small. Doesn't it make for a cool villain if the characters think they're fighting a red hag based on accounts they've read from centuries earlier, only to realize they're actually fighting the same hag? So, most hag stat blocks aren't particularly formidable in a straight up fight, especially not on their own. This might be why a coven of hags has chosen to band together, and this little sidebar about hag covens in the monster manual instantly makes them more dangerous. Firstly, it means your party are fighting 3 of them. This immediately breaks up the action economy and may remove the need to homebrew some legendary actions for your hag. And secondly, they get access to some pretty dangerous spells. I like that the hags share this spell list and the spell slots. They have to remain within 30 feet of each other to be able to use it, although I'd maybe make it 60 feet just so there's a bit more flexibility there. But it reinforces the idea that they're almost a single multi-headed monster. Again, I'm going to bemoan Volo's Guide to Monsters getting retired because its hag chapter also included alternative spell lists for hag covens whose interests were more specific. There was a divination spell list for hags of fate like Macbeth's 3 witches, and a nature spell list for hags who might be protecting an ancient fey forest. Change the spells your coven uses to best represent the themes you've chosen for them. Do use different types of hags in a single coven. My favorite combination is a red hag or a green hag as the oldest, an anise hag as the muscle, and the sea hag as the weakest and ugliest. This makes combat more engaging as each hag will attack in a different way, and some are more dangerous than others. Will your party deal with the biggest threat of the anise hag first, or try to remove the sea hag quickly to tip the balance in their favor? Hags can of course employ other minions as well, as is suitable for the theme they're representing. This can make them more formidable in combat even if you have a solo hag instead of a coven. A woodland witch might command the very trees to come alive and protect her. An anise hag might construct flesh golems from the remains of those she didn't eat. In the Grim Hollow Monster Grimoire, there's a collection of grotesque toys that make for unnerving minions for a hag that preys upon children. My preference is always to lean into the horror genre for monsters in a hag's employ to make the hag themselves seem as unpleasant and monstrous as possible. For all their monstrousness, and hags are monsters, they are intelligent creatures. And this is where you can get away from the cackling witch tropes and cartoonish villainy and lean into the moral ambiguity that dark fantasy tales thrive on. Maybe a coven of hags has manipulated the party's fate to bring our heroes together, having a great quest that only they are capable to accomplish, as seen in the Strands of Fate by the coven. It's a great way to start a campaign, and it's a great reason for the party to start adventuring together. This quest could be to defeat a great evil like a necromancer or a demon. What the party don't realize is that the hags' motivations aren't altruistic. They've seen their own destruction at the hands of this demon, and they're having the party alter that fate on their behalf. Maybe a red hag has a village cult form up around them, willing to sacrifice themselves in the red hag's ritual to have their body stolen so that the hag can live on. The hag is seen as a demigod to these folk, a repository of great knowledge and wisdom and culture. Perhaps the hag is preying upon this devotion, or maybe the hag genuinely cares about the community that has sustained them throughout the generations. That is a moral quandary that your party must decide. Hags are ancient creatures, and they're not human. They are Fae, at least in 5e. Their motivations and actions may seem nonsensical when they are in fact far-reaching through time. Are they willing to negotiate when they are presented with something that they want? If you have found this video about making hags a more formidable threat in your D&D campaign, be sure to give the video a like, and you can join our dark fantasy campaign by subscribing to the channel, because we're back every week with more advice about how to run a more grounded, horror-filled dark fantasy D&D campaign. If you want to know more about how to make Fae formidable for your D&D party, you can check out this video up here where we explore how to make fairies and the Feywild a horror encounter in your campaign. If you want to learn how to plan a monster hunting quest just like a Witcher, you can check out this video down here where we explain how to do that in a 5e campaign.